In the summer of 1999, a teenage girl vanished during a church retreat in rural Vermont. For over 2 decades, her disappearance remained a mystery. No witnesses, no suspects, no answers. But everything changed when a dying nun sent a handwritten confession that shattered years of silence. What she revealed would unravel a truth far darker than anyone imagined. This is the story of Emily Carter and the secret that refused to stay buried. The summer of 1999 in Vermont was unusually humid, the kind of heat that stuck to your skin and slowed time itself. At St. Clarice Monastery, tucked into the thick woods near Bellows Falls, the heavy air added a sense of drowsy tranquility. Each year, the Catholic diocese organized a summer retreat for teens meant to offer silence, reflection, and respite from the noise of adolescence. That July, 32 teenagers arrived by bus, their chatter clashing against the monastery's hushed rhythm. Among them was Emily Carter, a quiet but observant 16-year-old from New Hampshire whose mother had enrolled her hoping it would help Emily recenter after a tumultuous school year. Emily didn't resist. In fact, she welcomed the chance to disappear from the expectations of her small town, her cheerleader friends, and her ex-boyfriend with the wandering eyes. She arrived with a small duffel bag, a well-worn journal, and the silver locket her grandmother gave her, engraved with the initials E.C. Her mother kissed her goodbye with a strained smile. Emily didn't look back. The monastery's architecture was severe: stone walls, high windows, thick wooden doors. The nuns moved silently, their footsteps absorbed by ancient rugs. The girls and boys were housed in separate dormitories, and all electronics were turned in at the gate. Meals were taken in silence, chapel every morning, meditation in the afternoon. Emily, always introspective, took to the schedule with surprising ease. Her roommate, a curly-haired girl named Renee, found her a little odd but harmless. They spoke only in whispers at night, mostly about food cravings and who had crushes on which volunteer chaperones. On the 4th day, Emily skipped lunch. No one noticed at first. The heat had driven several students to their rooms early. Sister Anne, the one responsible for roll call, marked her absent with a question mark and moved on. By evening vespers, when Emily still hadn't shown, the concern grew. The monastery was surrounded by woods, but there was a high gate, and the nearest road was a mile away. No one had seen her leave. Sister Monica, the head nun, ordered a search. Flashlights cut through the dusk. They called her name, checked the woods behind the vegetable garden, the trails to the river, even the tool shed near the chicken coops. Nothing. Her bag was still in her room. Her journal lay open on the bed, the last entry written just before noon. Felt dizzy in chapel, near the old well, the well. It stood behind the monastery's rose garden, half covered in moss, rarely mentioned. When they reached it, they found nothing, except for a piece of jewelry glinting in the flashlight beam. It was Emily's locket. The chain was broken, one end frayed like it had snagged on something. The ground nearby was undisturbed. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. The well was sealed, covered by a heavy iron grate. No one remembered the last time it was used. Police arrived before midnight. They questioned everyone, nuns, students, volunteers. Emily's roommate said she hadn't seemed upset. One volunteer, Kevin Ray, vaguely recalled seeing her near the garden around noon. Looked like she was writing something. But there were no signs of foul play, no forced entry, no blood, just that locket and a gnawing sense that something had slipped quietly through the crack. Over the next few days, search teams combed the woods. Dogs were brought in, but lost the scent past the old well. Helicopters circled. Local news covered the story for a week, calling her the girl who vanished in stillness. Then, as summer faded, so did the coverage. Parents pulled their children from the program. The diocese issued a formal statement of condolence. The police, lacking evidence of a crime, eventually labeled her disappearance undetermined, possibly accidental. Perhaps she ran. Perhaps she got lost and succumbed to the elements. The official file remained open but inactive. But her mother never believed the official version. Diane Carter insisted Emily wouldn't have left her journal or taken off the locket she never removed, not even in the shower. For years she wrote letters to the monastery, to detectives, to local officials. Most went unanswered. She hired 2 private investigators. One gave up. The other vanished with her retainer. Time wore down her hope, but never her suspicion. Something had happened to Emily. And someone at that monastery knew more than they had said. In 1999, the case closed softly. No alarm bells, no tabloid frenzy, just a girl who walked into silence and never came back. But silence can be deceiving. Sometimes it waits to be broken. For the first 72 hours after Emily Carter's disappearances, St. Clarice Monastery turned into something between a sacred sanctuary and a crime scene. Uniformed officers moved through the quiet stone halls, flashlights cutting across faded frescoes and worn hymnals. The sisters, usually a picture of composure and detachment, flinched at every knock. Sister Monica, the head nun, wore her habit tighter, her tone clipped but cooperative. Yet even in her words of assistance there was always a careful line, one that investigators were discouraged from crossing. When Detective Ray Mueller, a 30-year veteran from Windham County, requested access to the monastery's underground levels, the old archival cellar and attached storerooms, he was met with polite deflection. Sister Monica explained that those spaces had been officially sealed since 1985, following a mold outbreak that rendered them unfit and dangerous. She produced a faded engineering report citing asbestos, dry rot, and collapse risk. The original maintenance blueprints were incomplete. According to the official statement, the entire basement was locked, inaccessible, and irrelevant to the case. Mueller pushed back, arguing that Emily's last known location, behind the garden near the well, was adjacent to one of the old basement air vents visible above ground. He was told, again, that there was no way for a person to enter the sublevel from outside and that the well had been sealed decades ago. Without a warrant or probable cause suggesting a crime had occurred in the basement, access was denied. The diocese backed the monastery's position. The judge agreed. The door to the basement, literally and legally, remained shut. Meanwhile, the investigation turned toward staff interviews. Most nuns gave little of value. Emily had been polite, quiet, spiritually curious, one of them noted. No one reported unusual behavior. The lay volunteers offered more insight. Renee, her roommate, insisted Emily had seemed distant the night before, but didn't appear distressed. Kevin Ray, the 23-year-old groundskeeper, maintained that he'd only seen Emily in passing, writing in her journal beneath the linden tree near the rose garden. His answers were practiced but casual, enough to avoid raising flags. He had no criminal record, lived in nearby Brattleboro with his uncle, and had volunteered at the retreat for 3 years. One name surfaced quietly in the margins of several witness forms: Sister Agnes, 61 years old, one of the older members of the order. A small, wiry woman with thick glasses and a perpetually distant gaze, she was mentioned twice as having seen Emily near the herb garden shortly before lunch. But when approached by detectives, Sister Agnes seemed confused. She greeted them with a smile, then mistakenly referred to one of them as Father David, a priest who had died 10 years earlier. Her thoughts jumped from decade to decade like a record skipping grooves. She spoke of visions, the girl with the blue ribbon, and the noises at night from the floor below. When asked to clarify, she grew quiet, muttered something about prayers, and withdrew. Her medical file, provided reluctantly, confirmed what officers suspected: early-stage dementia, officially diagnosed 2 years prior. She was noted as nonviolent, but occasionally disoriented. The detectives recorded her statement out of formality, but dismissed its evidentiary weight. The last person to claim seeing Emily had a questionable mind and no specific memory of the timeline. Her words were catalogued, then sidelined. By the end of the 3rd week, the search had turned cold. Without new leads, the media moved on. A local station ran a closing segment titled "Faith and Fear: The Vanishing at St. Clarabaro," framing the case as an eerie but unresolved mystery. Behind closed doors, the diocese urged the monastery to tighten internal records and discontinue external retreats until further notice. Sister Monica complied, locking down the retreat program indefinitely. The case file was moved to inactive status on September 18, 1999, exactly 61 days after Emily's disappearance. A final note from Detective Mueller read, "No evidence of foul play, no sign of abduction, no physical remains. Classification: missing presumed accidental or voluntary absence." Diane Carter refused to let it end there. She called the station daily, sent letters to the governor, demanded follow-up interviews with every staff member. When she hired a private investigator, Thomas Krigg, he hit the same wall Mueller had: sealed doors, medical excuses, and administrative apathy. Krigg tried pressing on Kevin Ray, checking employment history, running facial recognition across traffic cams and DMV files. Nothing concrete surfaced. Kevin left the area a year later. According to tax records, he relocated to Ohio. No forwarding address, no digital footprint. Just like Emily, he faded from the map. In 2004, 5 years later, Diane found a manila envelope left at her doorstep. No return address. Inside were two things: a Polaroid photo of Emily from the retreat, the same one she used on posters, but with the back scribbled in unfamiliar handwriting. She was in the basement. The second was a copy of a maintenance blueprint, one that showed a narrow servant stairwell to a locked lower level. This detail had been absent in all the files provided to law enforcement. Diane brought it to the police. They told her it was forged. "Someone's playing with your grief," one officer said, not unkindly. She left that office with the envelope still clutched in her hand, her eyes darker than before. By 2007, Sister Agnes had been moved to a long-term care facility in Massachusetts. Her mental state declined, but one line kept recurring in her fragmented speech. Nurses would later note it in her file. She asked about the girl again, said she was waiting under the chapel floor. No one knew what it meant. No one looked into it. And, at the monastery, the basement remained untouched. The stairs to it, hidden behind a false panel in a forgotten supply closet. The report filed, the door closed, and beneath all of it, dust, memory, silence. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in late April 2025 when the call came. Father Leo Whitman, now in semi-retirement and overseeing a small parish outside Burlington, was halfway through reading his homily when his phone buzzed with a message from the St. Benedict Care Center in Boston. The nurse's voice was calm, professional. Sister Agnes passed at 4:43 a.m., peacefully, no signs of distress. Father Leo didn't answer immediately. He stared at the rain pelting his window, the gray sky settling on his shoulders like the weight of all the years he had tried to forget. A few days earlier, an envelope had arrived at his office, hand-dressed in trembling cursive. He recognized instantly. The return address was the care center's. Inside was a single-page letter, yellowed slightly at the edges from age or frailty of paper, sealed with wax as if it were 1825, not 2025. No one used wax anymore, but Agnes did, always had. Leo remembered her as the quiet one, always on the fringes of community decisions, often dismissed for her murmuring prayers and whispers about sounds beneath the floors. He had pitied her back then, more than trusted her, but now, 26 years after the disappearance of Emily Carter, this letter pulsed like a second heartbeat in his desk drawer. He read it once that night, under the dim light of his reading lamp, and again the next morning, unable to shake the final line from his mind. It read, "Father Leo, if this reaches you, it means I am gone. I ask only that you listen with the heart of a confessor and the mind of a servant. I have carried something with me, no, concealed it, something that should have been spoken long ago." Emily Carter did not disappear. She was taken. And not by some outsider, but by someone we welcomed with open arms, someone we never should have trusted. His name is Kevin. I was there. I saw him. I didn't stop it. I told myself she had just walked away. But I knew. I always knew. The garden was not the end. The basement was never empty. God forgive me. Father Leo folded the letter slowly, his hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with age. The ink was faded, some parts smudged by what he assumed were tears. The letter had no date, but the envelope had been mailed 5 days before her death. Why now? Why after so long, and what did she mean by "the basement was never empty"? That space had been off limits, even to clergy, during his tenure. The diocese had shuttered it decades prior, or so they claimed. Leo knew he couldn't bring this directly to the church authorities, not without it disappearing, not without it being handled the way everything had been handled in 1999, quietly, internally, irreversibly. Instead, he made a copy and sent it, anonymously, to the Boston Globe. He didn't sign his name. He didn't include a return address, but he included the photo. A scanned image of Emily's locket recovered by police next to a cross-shaped indentation in the dirt. It was taken from the original case file which Leo had never returned to the archives, a small act of disobedience that had gnawed at him for decades. Alongside it, he attached the letter. Then he waited. 2 weeks passed, nothing. Then, on a Monday morning in May, an investigative reporter named Jamie Lynn captured the Windham County Sheriff's Office requesting comment on new allegations in the 1999 disappearance of Emily Carter. The Sheriff's Office issued a brief denial, but the article went live the next morning. Headline: Martha Mathewson, Crimson, reopens cold case. The piece included an excerpt from Agnes's letter and raised pointed questions about the monastery's refusal to allow basement access during the original investigation. Within 48 hours, the article went viral. Local media reignited interest. Forums and true crime podcasts picked it up. Emily's name, long buried in quiet sorrow, trended nationally for the first time in 2 decades. Diane Carter read the article while pouring coffee. Her hand froze mid-pour, dark liquid sloshing onto the counter. Her breath caught in her throat as if it recognized the truth before her mind did. Agnes, the one no one believed, the nun who talked in riddles and prayed for voices only she could hear. Diane had written her once, years ago, after the second investigator quit. She drove to Boston the next day and demanded to see the original letter. The Globe refused, but offered to read it aloud, in full. Diane listened, silent, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on a stain on the conference room table. When it ended, she whispered, "He took her." And they left. Back at home, she retrieved a dusty shoebox from her attic, the one with Emily's baby blanket, her second-grade drawings, the retreat registration form with Kevin Ray's signature. She stared at it for a long time, then pulled out the copy of the maintenance blueprint she'd received anonymously in 2004. She spread it out on the dining table, lining it up with a printed aerial map of the monastery grounds. Her fingers traced the dotted stairwell Agnes must have meant, a servant's stair hidden behind a panel in the south corridor connecting to the sealed basement. She had tried to tell the police. She had begged them. But this was something new. A nun's confession carried weight, even in a church that preferred silence. That night, Diane wrote a letter of her own, not to the police, not to the press, to the one man she remembered showing a hint of conscience 26 years ago, Father Leo Whitman. She didn't know where he lived now, only that someone like him wouldn't be far from the echoes of his past. She ended it with one sentence: "If you knew and you stayed silent, we're not done." Then she mailed it with no return address, just like Agnes had. 3 days later, Leo found the envelope on his kitchen table, placed there by a parish assistant who said, "Some lady dropped this off," didn't say much. He opened it slowly, his face pale as he read. He looked at the window, where the rain had just begun again. And somewhere beneath the drizzle, beneath the years, beneath the stone floor of a monastery he hadn't entered in decades, something stirred. It had been nearly 3 decades since Diane Carter last stood at the foot of the driveway leading up to St. Clara's Monastery. The same cracked stones crunched beneath her boots. The trees, now taller and more unkempt, still loomed like silent sentries guarding old secrets. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel of the rented sedan, her eyes flicking from the monastery's facade to the overcast sky above. Vermont in early May was moody, like her, unpredictable. She sat in the car for a full 5 minutes before shutting off the engine and stepping out. Her back ached more than it used to, but her resolve felt sharper, more focused. She hadn't come for peace, she came for truth. 3 days earlier, a letter had arrived in her mailbox with no return address and no postmark. Inside, a single photocopy. Sister Agnes's original confession, the one the Boston Globe had referenced but refused to share. Attached to it was a handwritten note. "She trusted you more than she trusted herself. I believe you still want answers. Come now, before the past is repaved." It was signed only, with the name Clara. Diane vaguely recalled the name, perhaps one of the younger nymphs she'd met during her desperate visits back in the early 2000s. It didn't matter. The message was clear. Someone on the inside wanted her to return. St. Clarice had changed in subtle but significant ways. The retreat wing had been shut down. The guest registry was digital now. Sister Monica had retired, replaced by a younger and more corporate-sounding Mother Superior named Eliza Park. But the stones were the same. The chapel smelled the same, incense and wood polish, sharp and holy. And the quiet was still the same kind of quiet that never comforted her, only reminded her of what had gone missing. Diane didn't ask for permission to explore. She knew better. Instead, she waited until the midday bell rang for prayer and slipped past the archivist's door when the hallway cleared. The storage room hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. Rows of metal filing cabinets, loose boxes, and curling ledgers stood like forgotten priests. She moved methodically, checking drawer after drawer, her fingers numb from the cold and the weight of expectation. After 45 minutes, she found it. In a small cardboard box labeled Retreat 1999 MISC. Beneath a torn attendance sheet and some disposable camera negatives was a navy blue notebook, Emily's notebook. Diane recognized the handwriting instantly, that looping script formed from years of Catholic school cursive. Her breath caught in her throat. She sat on the concrete floor, ignoring the dust, and began to read. The first few entries were mundane. Notes about chapel time, observations about her roommate's snoring, a quick sketch of a bird she saw near the garden. Then the tone shifted. Kevin R. helped me move a heavy bench today. He's funny, too funny to be a volunteer. Something about him doesn't match his clothes. The next entry, Kevin asked if I'd ever tried wine. I said no. He laughed and said I was too pure for this place. It didn't feel like a compliment. Diane flipped faster. He watches me a lot. I pretended not to see him near the laundry. He said I reminded him of someone he lost. I didn't know what to say. Then tried to avoid Kevin all morning. He found me behind the chapel anyway, gave me a bracelet. I didn't take it. He said I'd understand someday. I wish he'd go away. By the 10th entry, Diane's knuckles were white. Emily had been afraid. And no one noticed. Or worse, someone noticed and did nothing. She flipped to the final pages. Renee says I should tell someone, but I don't know who to trust. The sisters only see what they want. Kevin is clever. He's different. When adults are around, if something happens, I hope Mom knows I didn't just leave. I wouldn't do that to her. Not ever. Diane closed the notebook, holding it against her chest like an urn. She felt the room spinning, not from the dust, but from fury. They'd let this happen. They'd buried her daughter's voice in a mislabeled box. She rose stiffly and slipped the notebook into her coat, her fingers trembling. On the way out, she passed Sister Claire in the hallway, older now, with streaks of gray in her once-back hair. Their eyes met briefly. Clara said nothing, only nodded slightly, and walked away. Diane didn't speak to anyone else. She walked straight to her car, drove back to the motel near Brattleboro, and spread the notebook out on the bed. She reread it twice, took photos of every page, and highlighted names: Kevin Ray, Renee, Sister Monica. Then she opened her laptop, the same one she'd been using for over a decade, and logged into a private Dropbox folder titled EC. She added the new photos and created a subfolder, Journal Primary Evidence. That night, she emailed a friend from college, Janice Henley, now an investigative producer with a regional public television station. The subject line read, 1999, Retreat, Disappearance, New Evidence. In the body, she wrote, "You once told me that if I ever had proof, not just a theory, not just suspicion, you'd help me. I have it now. Real words in my daughter's own hand. You need to see this." Then, after hitting send, she returned to the Dropbox folder and opened a map of the monastery's blueprints. She compared it to the notebook. Emily had mentioned a door behind the storage closet in the laundry wing. "The place Kevin likes," she had written, "always locked. He says it's where they used to keep relics." I don't believe him. Diane studied the map again. There was no mention of that door, but if it existed, it would align almost perfectly with the stairwell marked on the maintenance plan she'd received in 2004, the one the police dismissed as a hoax. She pulled out her phone and called a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, Thomas Grigg, the first private investigator she'd hired. He'd quit after being denied access too many times, but maybe now, with Agnes's confession, Emily's journal, and renewed media attention, he'd answer differently. On the third ring, a tired voice said, "This is Tom." Diane replied without pause, "You still believe me, Tom? Because I've got something you need to see." There was silence. Then, "Where are you?" She looked out at the dark Vermont hills through the motel window and said, Tom Grigg met Diane the next morning at a diner just off Interstate 91. The kind of place where the coffee was always too bitter and the booths too close, yet somehow perfect for quiet conversations with sharp edges. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, leaner, with a permanent furrow between his eyes, but when she slid Emily's journal across the table, that furrow deepened into something more alert. He didn't ask for background. He flipped through the pages slowly, silently, pausing every so often to squint at a name or a phrase. When he reached the final entry, he closed the book and said, "You were right not to stop." Diane nodded once, her jaw clenched. "He's not Kevin Ray," she said. Tom raised an eyebrow. She pulled a manila folder from her bag and opened it to reveal a photocopy of the retreat's 1999 volunteer roster. There's no official record of him registering, no application, no background check. This list was fabricated. Tom scanned it, then asked, "So who was he?" Diane leaned in. "That's what I need you to find out." Over the next 10 days, Tom did what he did best. He dug. He started with old tax records, traced Social Security numbers attached to the name Kevin Ray, and hit a wall. The number listed on the volunteer form belonged to a deceased man from Ohio who died in 1983. The driver's license was a duplicate issued under an alias flagged by DMV Fraud Services in 2001, but the report had been buried in clerical backlog. There were no photos, no fingerprints on file. In essence, the man who called himself Kevin Ray had ghosted into the retreat under a false identity and vanished just as cleanly. Tom widened the search. He visited old staff members, tracked down former volunteers, cross-referenced maintenance contracts issued by the monastery in the late 90s. That's when he found Father Malcolm Stone, now retired and living in a care home in Montpelier. At 82, Father Malcolm had sharp moments amidst the blur of age. When Tom asked him about the 1999 summer retreat, his eyes narrowed. "The boy with the tan overalls," he murmured. "That one didn't belong." Tom leaned forward. "Kevin Ray?" The old priest nodded slowly. "Said he was with electrical maintenance, but we never filed for repairs that summer, and the basement, we were told no one was allowed down there. Still, I saw him going in more than once, always with a tool belt and that smug smile." When asked if he reported it, Father Malcolm looked away. "I told Sister Monica. She said he was cleared by the diocese." He shook his head. "I should have pushed harder." That same week, Tom and Diane returned to the monastery under the guise of requesting historical records for a documentary on Catholic architecture. Sister Eliza, ever wary, granted them 30 minutes with supervision. While she stepped away to take a call, Tom ducked into the south corridor and began tapping on the wall panels beside the old laundry wing. On the 6th panel, the sound changed. Hollow, then solid, a hidden recess. He marked it quietly with a pen, then slipped back into the archive room before Eliza returned. They left 10 minutes later, polite smiles hiding their racing thoughts. That night, in Diane's motel room, Tom pulled up satellite images and construction permits. He compared the blueprints from 2004 to city zoning files. There had once been an access shaft listed under subterranean ventilation, north wing, that was removed from official maps in 1986, following a structural compromise. Tom muttered. "Convenient timing," Diane replied, "or deliberate." 2 days later, Tom located a former diocesan contractor, Harold Dwyer, who remembered working on a discreet renovation at St. Clarice in the early 1990s. "They asked us to block off a sublevel," he said. "No demolition, just seal the doors, pour concrete, reroute the wiring. We didn't ask questions. It paid well." When shown a photo of Kevin from an old group snapshot, blurry but clear enough, Harold hesitated. "He was there, not part of my crew, but I remember the eyes." The final piece fell into place when Tom checked transient employment databases. A Kevin Ray, same face, same approximate age, had appeared under multiple aliases in 4 states between 1996 and 2003. Carol Ray, Kenneth Rowe, Kyle Reeves. Always manual work, always cash-only jobs. Each time he disappeared before any real paperwork could catch up to him. But then he vanished completely. The last trace was a pay stub from a garage in Dayton, Ohio, dated August 2004. After that, nothing. No tax filings, no arrest records, no death certificate. It was as if he'd evaporated. Tom called Diane that night. He was never real, he said, not in the way we assumed. He built a shadow and lived inside it. And now he's gone. Or he's still somewhere watching. Later, they re-examined Emily's journal. One line haunted them now more than ever. He says there's a place no one knows about, not even the sisters. He calls it his quiet room, Tom whispered. That's the basement. That's where we go next. Diane stared at the cracked ceiling of the motel room, heart pounding, and murmured. 3 weeks after uncovering Kevin's false identity, Diane sat across from Tom in a booth at the same diner, a Mannery and Valop envelope resting between them. Inside were building permits, invoices, and a signed waiver from a discreet construction team based out of Keene. The team specialized in off-record site inspections, often used by lawyers handling estate disputes where legal access was a gray area. Tom had arranged it through an old contact, no names, no question. The waiver was simple. 1 hour inside, no permanent modifications, absolute confidentiality. The team would gain entry early Sunday morning when the monastery was at Mass, and Sister Eliza, unaware of their plan, would be occupied. Diane had already transferred the retainer. She looked out the window, hands curled around a lukewarm mug, and whispered, "This time, we don't come out empty." Sunday came cold and overcast. At precisely 6:40 a.m., the three-man team, Marcus, Lewis, and Ray, arrived in a plain white van, parking behind the trees along the gravel service road. Diane and Tom waited nearby in a rented SUV, keeping watch. Marcus, the lead, carried a handheld ground-penetrating radar scanner and a thermal camera. Ray had an endoscope camera with an extended fiber optic tube, and Lewis brought the portable bolt cutter and crowbar. They entered through the east maintenance door Tom had unlocked 2 nights earlier during an unsupervised moment. It led straight to the south corridor, just beyond the old laundry wing. The panel Tom had marked clicked back with surprising ease, revealing a narrow wooden staircase descending at a steep angle, the air below thick with mildew and rot. Ray went first, flashlight beam bouncing against crumbling stone. The steps creaked but held. At the bottom they found a short passage ending at a heavy metal door, its surface rusted, but the hinges intact. No official lock, only a horizontal bolt latched from the inside. Ray inserted the camera scope through a jagged corner where the stone wall had cracked slightly and gasped. She saw a room no larger than a janitor's closet, 8 feet by 10, with a single cot pressed against the far wall, a rusted metal bucket in the corner, and what looked like shredded fabric near the foot of the bed. But what struck her most wasn't the items, it was the walls. The interior stone was clawed, deep vertical lines etched into the mortar, spaced as if made by frantic, desperate fingers. She pulled the scope back slowly. Marcus nodded grimly and slid the crowbar into the side gap. With a sharp pop and groan, the bolt gave way. The door opened to a stale wave of air, thick with dust, and something darker, time, decay, memory. The team entered with care. On the cot lay a balled-up cloth, once pale blue, now stained and torn. Marcus unfolded it to reveal a patch with faded embroidery, St. Clair's summer program. Beneath it was a name tag, just legible. Ray turned slowly toward the far corner and illuminated a series of small objects on the floor. A wooden hairbrush with 3 long blonde strands still knotted in the bristles. A broken pencil. A beaded bracelet with the word Hope on one side and 1999 on the other. Then Lewis spotted the shoe prints. Near the center of the room, barely visible under layers of dust and grime, were 2 parallel tracks, a single pair of small feet, pointed inward, size consistent with a teenage girl. They stood facing the door. Diane would later say that it looked like someone had waited there, standing for hours, maybe days, hoping the door would open. Marcus used a sterile swab to lift a sample from the wall beneath one claw mark, placing it in a sealed evidence tube. Ray collected hair from the brush with tweezers. Tom, standing outside the threshold, didn't move for several minutes. Then he turned to Diane, who stood beside him with her fists clenched, eyes fixed on the broken cot. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She only stepped forward, reached for the small bracelet, and held it like a relic from another world. Back upstairs, they cleaned everything. The panel was reset, dust brushed back over the floor, tools packed away. They left the monastery without being seen. Later that evening, in Tom's motel room, they laid the evidence on the bed in silence. Diane stared at the hairbrush, her fingers hovering above the strands. "She was here," she whispered. "This is where he kept her." Tom nodded, jaw tight, "And no one knew." Diane's voice hardened. "Or they did, and looked away." That night, Marcus ran the shoe print data through a forensic software with defense attorneys. He matched the tread pattern to a discontinued brand of teenage sneakers sold in the late 1990s, Reebok Charm Lights, women's size 6. Only sold for 2 seasons, Diane confirmed they were the exact shoes Emily had worn when she boarded the retreat bus. Tom began drafting a preliminary report, fact-checked, dated, and indexed by item, then saved it to 2 encrypted drives. One was given to Diane, the other was stored in a safe deposit box in Brattleboro. "We do this carefully," he warned. "We don't hand it to the local PD and expect them to act. We take this higher. Federal, if we have to." Diane agreed, but her next step wasn't official channels. It was personal. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd stored under Watchdog, Janice Henley, the journalist friend who had promised to help if she ever had real proof. When Janice answered, clogged from sleep, Diane said only one sentence. "I found where she was held." There was a pause, then, "Send me everything. I'm booking a flight." While Diane sent the files, Tom placed a separate call to a geneticist contact in New York, requesting a rush DNA comparison between the hair strands and the sample Diane had submitted to a National Missing Persons database in 2013. The contact confirmed receipt and promised results within 10 days. The days that followed were slow agony. Diane stopped sleeping. She returned each night to the photos, the bracelet, the walls, and on the morning of the 8th day, the call finally came. The call came at 7:19 a.m., waking Diane from a shallow sleep filled with flickering images of stone walls and a girl's desperate eyes. The voice on the other end was clinical but respectful. "Mrs. Carter, this is Dr. Elise Nolan from the Forensic Analysis Lab. I'm calling to confirm the results of the DNA test you requested." Diane sat up in bed, clutching the phone. There was a pause, then, "The hair sample and the fabric fiber both produced viable DNA strands. They match your daughter's federal missing persons profile with 99.97% certainty. The material we tested came from Emily Carter." Diane didn't cry. She whispered, "Thank you," then hung up and stared at the motel ceiling, hollowed by both relief and fury. Emily had been there, held, confined, clawing at walls, in a monastery basement while the world moved on. Tom arrived 10 minutes later with 2 coffees and a manila envelope. She handed him the phone, repeating the news. He exhaled slowly and muttered, "Now they have to listen." Within hours, Janice Henley's investigative team arrived. They set up in an empty conference room at a nearby community center, covering every surface with evidence, journal entries, DNA reports, satellite maps, audio transcript. Janice had one goal: prove a cover-up not just of a crime, but of a system's failure to follow one voice. The breakthrough came 2 days later when Janice's junior researcher tracked down a retired FBI field agent, Charles Mencken, who had worked in missing persons until his retirement in 2009. After initial reluctance, he agreed to meet in a coffee shop near Albertson. When Janice asked if he remembered the Emily Carter case, he rubbed his face and said, "Yeah, we had her flagged for 3 months. Then it went dead. Too many blind spots." But when shown the photo of the blue shirt fragment with the retreat patch and a name tag, Emily C., his hand stopped midair. "I saw that name again," he said quietly. "Back in 2001, when I was stationed in New York City, there was a raid on a suspected trafficking ring in Brooklyn. One of the girls who escaped before the raid turned herself into a shelter in Queens. She gave her name as Emily Carter, said she was taken from Vermont, but no one believed her." Janice leaned forward. "Why not?" He hesitated, then answered, "Because her name triggered a flag, but it was coded as presumed deceased. The local precinct treated her as a runaway or a liar. Her story was full of gaps, trauma-based memory issues. She couldn't give exact dates. They took her fingerprint, cross-referenced, but never followed up. Was there a report? Mencken nodded. Internal, never public, not enough to verify. After she disappeared again, we assumed it was an alias case. No one connected it to the retreat. Janice asked if he had a copy. He shook his head, then added, "But I know someone who might." That night, Mencken sent a scanned document to Tom's encryptive inbox. It was a 2-page intake form dated August 17, 2001, with the header NYPD, Juvenile Victim Preliminary Statement. The subject was listed as Jane Doe, self-percolated name, Emily Carter. She was described as Caucasian, approximately 18 years old, malnourished, with scars on her wrists and upper arms. The note read, "Claims abduction from religious site in Vermont, held in cellar for long time, transferred by mail, friend of nuns, claims escape via train station with assistance from another girl." The report ended with, "Mental state, fragmented record, possible psychosis, verification pending, transferred to temporary care facility, left premises before second interview." The file had been archived, with no further action, low credibility due to missing corroboration. Diane read it slowly, each line stabbing deeper than the last. Emily had escaped. She'd made it out. She'd said her name. But no one listened. No one believed her. They thought she was crazy, Diane murmured. But she was screaming the truth. Tom rechecked the database and found that fingerprints from the intake were never linked to Emily's case, because her prints had never been entered by New Hampshire authorities. She'd never been arrested, never hospitalized. The system simply failed to connect her identity. Janice turned to her team and said, "We need to find the girl from the station, the one who helped her escape. That's the next link." They began reviewing records from shelters in Queens during the 2001 window, focusing on intake logs with matching dates. It took 48 hours and 3 contacts, but eventually they found an archived logbook from the Liberty Haven shelter, handwritten in pencil. 2 names were listed on August 18, 2001, Rosa M., and in the latter included a partial address in the Bronx. Diane stared at it for a long time. Rosa. Tom and Janice tracked Rosa Morales down using voter rolls and public utility databases. She now lived in Hartford, Connecticut, working nights as a janitor at a middle school. They approached her after shift, showed her the journal photo and a scanned copy of the intake form. She flinched. "I remember her," she said, quiet, terrified. She said she'd been held for years, called the guy Kevin, but also Father Kevin. Said he watched her pray, made her eat from a bowl on the floor. I believed her, but nobody else did. Rosa confirmed that she and Emily fled together. They'd ridden a northbound freight train, but when police checked the station, they panicked and ran. Emily got spooked and jumped off at a siding. Rosa never saw her again. I waited 3 nights in Queens, but she didn't come back. I figured she'd found family. Or worse. Diane listened, silent, her knuckles white. Rosa looked down. She said she wasn't dead, just forgotten. Janice began building a new report, this time titled, "Emily Carter, Survivor Ignored." She prepared to pitch it as a multi-part expose across platforms, coordinated with legal teams to protect sources. Tom began filing a petition to reopen the case under new grounds: false identification, misfiled evidence, suppression by local and federal authorities. And Diane. She packed her suitcase, stared out the motel window into the foggy trees, and whispered Emily's name again. The revelation came not from a breakthrough in the lab or a tip from the public, but from a frustrated intern named Caleb, working under Janice Henley's team. Tasked with combing through archived newspaper clippings and forgotten local dockets, Caleb stumbled upon a small column from a June 1994 edition of the Harrisburg Gazette. The headline read, "Local man cleared of allegations in teen confinement case. The accused, Kevin Morrow, 27 at the time." Caleb flagged it, cross-referenced with known aliases and locations, and brought it to Jarrett that afternoon. She scanned the article, brief, buried beneath an ad for lawnmowers, and her eyes narrowed. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. It was him, Kevin Morrow. The article detailed how Morrow had been accused of unlawfully detaining a 15-year-old girl who had been reported missing by her family. She reappeared after 3 weeks, disoriented and bruised, claiming Morrow had kept her locked in a trailer behind his house to keep her safe from the world. The girl's testimony was dismissed in court due to inconsistencies and her mental health history. Morrow walked free, and the case was quietly closed. Janice alerted Tom, who immediately ran a check on property records under the Morrow name. Nothing current, but a search of shell corporations and business licenses led him to an auto repair shop registered in 2005 under the name K. Rowe Mechanics in a rural stretch of Lycoming County, Pennsylvania. The listed owner, Kenneth Rowe, another alias previously tied to Kevin's employment trail. The shop had been operational for 6 years before closing in 2011, due to health reasons, according to a tax filing. Diane sat across from them as the pieces fell into place, her expression stony. "He got smarter," she said. "After Emily, he made sure no one could trace him directly." They drove to Lycoming County that weekend. The repair shop still stood, a squat corrugated metal building with boarded windows and a faded sign swinging in the wind. Locals said it had been abandoned for years. A woman at a diner nearby recalled Kenny as quiet, always alone, a little strange. She remembered him giving free tune-ups to single moms and sometimes offering odd jobs to teens. "We thought he was kind," she added, "until that girl disappeared." Tom leaned in. "What girl?" The woman, shifting uncomfortably, replied, "Stephanie Ward, 17, vanished after her shift at the grocery store in 2004. No one ever found her." "Last person seen talking to her? Kenny." Janice pulled public records. Stephanie's case was still listed as active, but cold. Her file mentioned the mechanic shop only once, initially dismissed due to lack of physical evidence. A local officer at the time had noted the girl's bike was found half a block from the shop. That officer had since retired. Tom requested access to the case file and cross-referenced the timeline with Kevin Morrow's known activity. The overlap was undeniable. Kevin, using the name Kenneth Rowe, had been in Lycoming County from 2003 to 2006. Stephanie vanished in June 2004. Just like Emily, she was last seen near a place Kevin frequented. They searched property transaction logs and found that the mechanic shop had been sold off in 2012 to a salvage company, who later used the site for storage. Tom contacted the company under the pretense of scouting abandoned structures for a documentary and requested a walkthrough. Surprisingly, the owner agreed. Inside, the shop was a tomb of rusted metal and silence. In the back corner, they discovered a crawl space, covered by a sheet of plywood and cinder block. Diane felt her breath catch as they moved the blocks away. The crawl space revealed a narrow compartment no more than 4 feet high, lined with rotting insulation. On the far wall was a rusted bolt loop and a thin rope, frayed at one end. Ray, who had rejoined for the inspection, photographed everything. Tucked in the corner, under a tattered tarp, they found something worse. A torn strip of denim, partially buried, with initials inked faintly in the hem. Tom didn't need confirmation. He called in a contact from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Investigation under the radio, who agreed to process the fabric quietly. The DNA match came 4 days later, Stephanie Ward. Kevin Morrow wasn't just a man who disappeared, he was a predator who moved through small towns like smoke, never staying long enough to attract suspicion, always using places of trust, churches, workshops, community centers, to get close to the vulnerable. Diane read the report in silence, then asked one question, "How many more?" Tom didn't answer. Janice's team compiled the evidence into a working timeline linking Kevin's known movements, under at least 5 aliases, to missing persons reports in Ohio, Vermont, Pennsylvania, and possibly western New York. None had been conclusively solved. They forwarded the full case file to federal authorities under the new alias Exposure, along with a request to reopen the Emily Carter case as an interstate objection investigation. The response was immediate. Agents arrived in Vermont within a week to conduct new interviews and secure the monastery's grounds. Sister Eliza, blindsided, tried to deny knowledge but was forced to comply. The basement was sealed off with caution tape and guarded pending forensic re-examination. Diane stood outside the monastery gates the morning the agents arrived. She watched as the past, long buried, was finally pulled into daylight. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just waited. Janice turned to her and said, "They'll find what he left behind." Diane whispered, "He never meant to leave anything behind." That afternoon, Tom received a call from his contact in the New York shelter system. A counselor from 2001 had seen the news and come forward. She remembered the girl who called herself Emily. She remembered the scars, the silence, and the single sentence Emily repeated every night before bed. The tip came through a federal health database cross-check initiated after the FBI reclassified the Emily Carter case as an active interstate objection. A biometric flag was triggered in New Jersey's health system. An emergency room record from late 2018 listed a woman named Emma Cartwright, treated for a car accident, who had voluntarily submitted DNA for a genetic condition screening. The data had recently been uploaded to a national database, and with the Carter family profile newly reactivated by Diane's submission, the system pinged. A 98.7% mitochondrial match between Emma Cartwright and Diane Carter. The alert went straight to Agent Laura Mitchell, newly assigned to the case. She triple-verified the match before making the call. Diane was in the small garden behind the motel, watering a line of basil she'd planted in repurposed coffee cans, a gesture to stay sane through the rising chaos, when her phone rang. Agent Mitchell's voice was calm, even as her words shook Diana to her core. "We believe we've located your daughter. She's alive. Her name now is Emma Cartwright. We're arranging a private meeting. It hit the ground with a soft metallic thud as water pooled near her feet. The meeting was arranged with care, neutral ground, no media, no cameras. A conference room in a secure wing of a Newark hospital, the same hospital where Emma had been treated. Tom drove Diane there, saying little, watching the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers flexed constantly as if bracing for impact. Inside, they waited for 42 minutes. Then the door opened. She entered quietly, shoulders squared but eyes scanning the room like an animal still unsure of its safety. Her hair was darker now, shorter, her face thinner, but the bone structure was unmistakable. Diane stood slowly, breath catching, unable to speak. Emily paused, then said, "You're her." It wasn't a question. Diane took one step forward, nodded once, and whispered, "You're my girl." And for the first time in 26 years, Emily Carter fell into her mother's arms. The moment passed like a held breath. Then they sat. Agent Mitchell asked if Diane was willing to hear the account as Emily remembered it. She nodded. Emily stared at the tabletop, hands shaking slightly, and began. She remembered the retreat, the games, the chapel services, the hallway where Kevin waited. She remembered being told to follow him for a special project. Then the smell of the basement, the click of the door behind her. The days after were a blur. She recalled injections, disorientation, dreams she wasn't sure were real. "He said it was for my nerves," she said, "that I needed help, that I couldn't go home yet." When asked about the years between 1999 and 2003, she struggled. Flashes, she admitted, hotel rooms, a trailer, sometimes other girls, never the same place twice. She remembered being afraid of light, then of people. At some point the drugs stopped or ran out. That's when she escaped. He left the van unlocked. I waited until he was gone. I ran. She made it to Philadelphia, then north. She changed her name to Emma, using documents she bought from someone at a shelter. "I was tired of not being real," she said. She found work under the table, slept in group homes, moved constantly. "I couldn't stay anywhere too long. I kept thinking he'd find me, that someone else would take me back." In 2005, she landed a job at a small bookshop in Trenton. She kept her head down, saved what she could. Later, she enrolled in night school. "I lived like I was made of glass," she said, always afraid to crack. Tom asked if she'd ever tried to reach out. Emily hesitated. "I wrote letters I never mailed. I searched for my name once and saw I was presumed dead." It felt like a wall, like if I said something I'd go back, or be blamed. Janice, who had joined the meeting to record with consent, asked gently, "What changed?" Emily looked at Diane. "The news story. The basement. The bracelet. That was mine. I saw the photo in a comment thread. I clicked. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I kept seeing the wall with the claw marks. That was mine too. The FBI offered witness protection, counseling, long-term reintegration services. Emily declined the name change, but accepted a safe house. She agreed to testify if charges were brought, but she asked for time. "I don't know how to be a daughter anymore," she told Diane, "but I want to try." Diane smiled through tears. "We start slow, 1 minute at a time." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Diane met daily. Long walks, shared meals, old photos. They talked about music, books, the dog Emily had begged for at 9. There were gaps, moments of silence too heavy to fill, but also laughter, tentative and precious. Emily kept the blue bracelet on her nightstand. She started journaling again. Janice prepared the final episode of her series. It aired nationwide. Public reaction was seismic. Praise, outrage, grief. Donations poured in for missing persons charities. Diane was invited to speak at advocacy conferences. She declined most. "My only job now is to help her heal," she said. But as Emily's memories began to settle, one question kept resurfacing. One she hadn't voiced yet. One she finally whispered one morning as they sat on Diane's porch, wrapped in blanket. "He never said why," she said. "Why me? Why the retreat? Why the church?" Diane looked out at the trees, wind rustling through the leaves, and replied, "The arrest warrant was issued in late June, 2 weeks after the FBI formally closed the investigation into the identity of Kevin Ray, and released an affidavit concluding that Kevin Moreau had committed multiple acts of abduction and unlawful imprisonment between 1994 and 2004 under a series of aliases. The charges were comprehensive: kidnapping, endangerment, assault, and conspiracy, but they would never see trial. When the task force tracked down the legal representative listed in Kevin Moreau's final known tax documents, they learned that he had passed away quietly in a hospice facility in rural Kentucky 4 years earlier. Cause of death: metastatic pancreatic cancer. No next of kin, no funeral, just a line on a death certificate and a burned box of ashes. Diane received the news with a strange stillness, her hands folded on her lap as she absorbed the reality that the man who had destroyed her daughter's life had slipped out of this world unpunished. Emily said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "He's gone." "But I'm not." That night she began to write. With the support of Janice and a trauma counselor named Dr. Fields, Emily agreed to tell her story publicly, not through dramatization or sensationalism, but in her own voice. The plan was a 3-part televised interview series, followed by a long-form podcast co-conduced by Janice's media network and a national advocacy organization for missing persons. Emily spent weeks reconstructing her memories, fact-checking with FBI files, and reading old journal fragments Diane had preserved. It was a slow process, full of grief and reawakening, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in decades: control. The first interview aired on national television in October, exactly 26 years and 4 months after she disappeared from the St. Claret summer retreat. The image of Emily, now 41, composed but vulnerable, seated beside her mother, captured the attention of millions. She spoke of the monastery, the man she had trusted because he wore a volunteer badge, the basement cell, the drugs, the silence. She recounted her escape, the years spent in hiding, the fear that never left her. But she also spoke of survival, of reclaiming her name, of forgiving herself. The response was overwhelming. Letters, emails, social media messages flooded in. Survivors of similar cases reached out, some for the first time in decades. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported a 63% spike in long-term missing person tips in the month following the interview. 3 cold cases were reopened within the first 2 weeks. Emily became an unintentional symbol, not of victimhood, but of endurance. She was invited to testify before a congressional panel examining institutional oversight failures in religious organizations and youth retreats. Alongside her, Diane presented copies of volunteer logs, the falsified ID used by Kevin Moreau, and the journal entries Emily had written in 1999. Lawmakers listened. The pressure grew. By early 2026, new federal guidelines were enacted requiring independent background checks for all volunteers working with minors in religious programs, regardless of location or denomination. The policy, informally dubbed Emily's Law, passed with bipartisan support. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops issued a formal apology and committed to internal audits across all diocesan retreat programs. For the first time, St. Clara's Monastery opened its archives for full review. Emily declined most interviews after the initial series, preferring to return to a quiet life in Vermont, not far from where her story began. She adopted a rescue dog, started taking art classes, and eventually joined a local support group for trauma survivors. Diane sold her home in New Hampshire and moved to be close. They didn't live together, but they shared Sunday dinners, holiday drives, and long walks by the river. Slowly, the space between them, once defined by absence, was filled with presence. In April, Emily published a memoir, Rooms Without Windows, detailing her experience in the basement, the years she spent lost, and the road back. It became a bestseller within weeks, praised for its honesty and restraint. Proceeds were donated to nonprofit groups aiding survivors of trafficking and long-term abductions. One evening, as spring began to bloom again across Vermont, Diane sat with Emily on a porch swing, watching the sky turn to lavender. The wind was soft. The world felt, for once, still. Emily turned to her mother and asked, "Do you think she ever gave up on me, the girl I was?" Diane looked at her, eyes full of steady certainty, and said, "She's the reason you're here. She never left, she just waited until you were ready to find her again." They rocked quietly, letting the dusk fold over them like a blanket, and in that moment, for the first time in a quarter century, everything felt whole. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries. Which part hit you the hardest? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I read every one.